Good afternoon and welcome to the Bee Yard. The fall rains have finally started after a long, hot and dry summer here in Michigan. And with the rains have come the fall flowers. The bees are busily at work taking advantage of summer's last hurrah. They seem almost frantic in their coming and going. They know there are only a few weeks left before settling into a long Michigan winter. As things wind down in the bee yard, we now have more time to spend in the workshop, tending to all of those long overdue projects. And that is a good thing, since time spent in the workshop is quality time. One project that a beekeeper should definitely put on their list is building their own beehive. It is not complicated. I can think of no better way to expand and extend your beekeeping journey than building your own equipment. Building your own beehive is easy on your budget, and you will end up with first-class stuff. In this series of videos, we will show you how to build a beehive, from the hive stand at the bottom to the telescoping cover at the top, and everything in between. It is a great winter project. So join us as we learn how to build a beehive in the beekeeper's workshop. Today's project, building the hive-bodies, which are used for the brood chambers and the honey supers. Well, winter has finally arrived at the bee yards here in Michigan, so it is a good time to retreat to the workshop and continue with our project of building a beehive. Today, we will build the hive bodies. In a beehive, the hive bodies sit on the bottom board and below the inner cover. Hive bodies are the main living space in a beehive. The lower hive bodies are used as the nursery or brood chamber where the queen lays eggs and the nurse bees raise the young. And the upper hive bodies are used as a pantry or supers where the workers store honey and sometimes pollen. There are probably more variations in the size of hive bodies than any other component of the hive. There are three commonly found heights of the hive body, which beekeepers call deep, medium, and shallow, and three different widths, 10 frame, 8 frame, and 5 frame, which refers to the number of frames that each box can hold. However, note that the length is always 19 7/8 inches for a finished inside dimension of 18 3/8 inches. This is because the frames are standardized to fit in this length of a box. In this video, we will be building an 8-frame medium hive body, since that is what I use in my bee yard. The downloadable plans for this project contain the dimensions for all of these different heights and widths. We'll start with a 1x8 pine board and cut two pieces 19 7/8 inches long for the sides and two pieces 12 1/4 inches long for each end. Remember, we are making an 8-frame medium hive body. To save time when cutting the boards to length, clamp a stop on your saw's table so that you can slide the board up against the stop and have the correct length for the cut. Then make all of your cuts for this length by simply sliding the board up against the stop and cutting to length. You won't have to measure the cut line for each piece. We have a video already out on how to make the hand holes, so today we're just going to go over this step very quickly. For details, go to our video, Making Hand Holes, which you can find on our Beekeeper's Workshop channel on YouTube. The trick in making hand holes is using a radial arm saw with a 14-inch piece of plywood supported in front by a 2x4. This setup will give us a jig slanted at 15 degrees, an angle that will result in a 2-inch high handhold that is 1/2 inch deep, just what we want. By rotating the saw's head to 25 degrees, we get a 10-degree undercut on the top of the handhold, which really improves the grip and feel. We can then mill the handhold in each of the 4 sides of the hive bodies. Notice that a stop positions the board so that the cut is centered lengthwise. Also, the stop prevents kickback, which can really ruin a good day in the shop. To make the handhold, I draw 2 marks 2 inches apart on the board's center line. This will be the beginning and the end of the handhold vertically. Then I raise the blade about 1/3 of the way from the top mark for the first cut. Next, the blade is lowered and the next third is removed. Keep lowering the blade until the handhold starts at the lower mark. Usually it takes me about 3 passes. This same procedure is repeated on each of the 4 sides of the hive bodies. When done, you end up with professional-looking handholds that are just as good, if not better, than anything you will find commercially. On the top inside edge of each end board, we need to make the frame rest. I'll show you 2 different ways to make this feature. One uses a standard blade on the table saw, and the other uses a dado blade. The frame rest is a ledge which is made by cutting a rabbet that is 3/8 of an inch wide and 5/8 of an inch deep. To make the frame rest with a standard blade on my table saw, I am using the tenon jig. I have moved the fence so that there is 3/8 of an inch between the tenon jig and the outside of the blade, and raised the blade to 5/8 of an inch. We want the frame rest to be on the inside of the box, so be sure to keep the outside of the board, the side with the handhold, facing away from the fence. And also make sure that you are cutting the top edge. The handhold will be toward the bottom. Once everything is set up and secure, it is just a matter of running the board through the saw. Now make the same cut on the second end board. To make the cheek cut of the rabbet, I have removed the tenon jig and lowered the blade to 3/8 of an inch. The fence is moved to 5/8 of an inch from the outside of the blade. Now to complete the rabbet, run each end board along the fence with the handhold facing up. The cutout piece will likely be thrown back, so stand aside. This is what the frame rest will look like when you are done. We can also make the frame rest with a dado blade on either the radial arm or the table saw. Notice that I have clamped a sacrificial board on the fence so that I can make the first cut on the frame rest flush with the top of the end board. The dado blade has been set 3/8 of an inch high. Using a dado blade has certain advantages, in that it is easier to set up and probably a bit faster for this job. To complete the frame rest, we move the fence 5/8 of an inch to the outside of the dado blade. And then run it through again. To get a good frame rest using this approach, you need a high-quality, sharp dado blade. I'm using a Freud stacked dado blade, which seems to do a really good job. It gives me a very smooth cut and sharp corners. Nothing wrong with that frame rest. So now we have our frame rest in the 2 end pieces. 2 frame rests, each made with a different technique. One is not necessarily better than the other. And it's a good lesson for beekeeping and life in general. We may have the same goals, but we may choose different paths to get there. Now we can focus on making the spline joints in the corners to complete the box. We have covered making spline joints in another video, making a sugar duster feeder, which you can find on the Beekeeper's Workshop on our YouTube channel. So again, we will quickly go over the steps here. Check out this other video for the details. A spline joint is made by cutting a 1/4 inch groove 3/8 inch deep and centered on the end of both end boards, and a matching groove or dado on the inside face of the side boards. As we saw before, a 3/4 inch wide and a 1/4 inch thick spline fits into these grooves, providing both a mechanical strength and a lot of glue surface. A stacked dado blade is the tool to use for this job. Notice that I am using the shim to get a very accurate 1/4 inch wide cut. That is one feature that I like about the Freud blades. A set of shims are provided for this purpose. Using a dado blade will result in a very uniform width groove and make cutting both the tenon groove and the face dado easy and precise. With the tenon jig in place, I have moved the fence so that there is a 1/4 inch between the jig and the inside of the blade, and raised the blade to 3/8 of an inch. Let's start with the end board. Make sure the outside of the board, the side with the handhold, is facing in toward the fence. Clamp the board to the tenon jig and cut the first tenon groove. Rotate the board end for end, keeping the handhold toward the fence, and make the same cut on the other end. To make the matching dado on the face of the end board, don't move the dado blade and use the tenon jig as a spacer. Make sure the handhold side of the board is facing up, and simply cut a dado on both ends of the board. With the dado on the face of the sideboard and the tenon groove on the end of the end board, we are ready to cut the splines that make this whole thing work. To complete the joint, we need to make the splines. The splines are 1/4 inch thick and 3/4 inch wide, and at least the width of the board, in our case a 1x8. But I like to make the splines a bit longer and then cut the length after we have the box assembled. When making the splines, cut along the length of the board a rip cut and not across the board a cross cut. They will be stronger this way. The splines need to fit snugly, but not forcibly, into the dado and tenon pocket we just cut. Getting a snug fit is perhaps the most tedious aspect of this project. You may need to cut a test spline or two, making minute adjustments to the saw's fence each time in order to get the spline's thickness just right. Perhaps your first thought would be to set the fence 1/4 inch from the blade and then start cutting your splines. But cutting thin strips from a length of board is just asking for a kickback. Pay attention to the spline when I complete the cut. I have had splines go right through a cardboard box that I set up as a backstop. This is a hole in the wall of my shop which I have left unpatched just to remind me of what a kickback can do. This kickback was from the radial arm saw over 10 feet away. Here is a tip that will prevent this sort of unpleasant workshop drama. Kickbacks are caused when the spline is pinched up against the fence and the blade. So the obvious answer is to move the fence so that you are cutting the spline on the outside of the blade rather than on the inside. But this means for each cut you have to move the fence to reposition the board. So how can we do this and still get the exact same thickness without having to go through the tedious setup for each spline that we cut? Here's how I do it. In the miter gauge track, insert a tight-fitting strip of wood. I'm using a scrap piece of oak. Then using your combination square, drop in a 1/4 inch drill bit against the base of the square and slide the ruler up against the blade's kerf. Tighten the ruler at this spot. Now when the drill bit is removed, the end of the ruler is a 1/4 inch away from the outside of the blade. For each cut, place the board, I'm using a scrap piece of 1x8, against the fence and slide the fence and board over until it is stopped by the combination square's ruler. And cut your spline. The spline will be exactly a 1/4 inch thick and no kickback. Now it is just a matter of repeatedly moving the fence so that the board butts up against the ruler. Because this technique is so repeatable, I find it easier to match the width of the tenon groove and dado that we cut earlier to the width of the splines, rather than the other way around. And that is why the shims on the dado blades are so handy. You can adjust the width of the dado to exactly match the width of the splines. Each spline you cut will be exactly the same width, and without the danger of a kickback. Another tip is to use a zero clearance insert to prevent the spline from falling down into the saw blade housing. Zero clearance inserts are a big step up on the safety ladder when working with a table saw. You can find these moderately priced gadgets online at many woodshop supply outlets. We are now ready to assemble the box. First, dry fit all of the parts together and make sure everything fits. Pay particular attention to the corners and make sure the spline is not too wide and forcing the corners apart. It is also a good idea to slide in a frame and make sure it fits okay. Once you are satisfied with the fit, you can glue and nail the box together. We will be trimming the box to the final height of 6 5/8 inches, so I am making a mark at this point to avoid putting a nail there. I am also marking the inside edge of the joint so that I know where to spread the glue. I use Franklin's exterior tight bond and a glue brush to make sure I have an even coat of glue on all joint surfaces. Any gaps in the glue will weaken the joint. Be sure to also include the splines when spreading the glue. After getting all of the joints glued up, tap the corners to get everything tight. I like to assemble the box upside down. Firmly tamp each corner to make sure the top of the box is flush with the table. Use a bar clamp to tighten the joints and hold the box together, making sure the box is square. Then nail the boards together. I am using 1 3/4 inch 18 gauge brads. When nailing, be sure to avoid the area that we marked earlier where we will be trimming the box to height. Now we can clean up any excess glue and do the final inspection. Notice that we have splines sticking out from the top bottom, and these will be removed in the next step when we trim the box to height. You might have also noticed a small breakout in the corner. We will be trimming that side of the box to height, so these small chips won't make a difference. Recall that we made the box out of a full 1x8 board, which is 7 1/4 inches wide. For a medium depth super, we need a final height of 6 5/8 inches, so we need to trim the box to this height. I like to trim the box to the final height at the very end because I will get an even bottom that will sit flush on the hive with no gaps. So on the table saw, move the fence 6 5/8 inches from the inside of the blade. Then run the box through the saw, trimming to length on the bottom. Notice that I have the top of the box up against the fence. You will make 4 cuts, 1 on each side of the box. When you make that last cut, be sure to hold the trimmed piece so that it doesn't get caught in the blade. After we get the box trimmed, examine the frame rests. You will notice that the top of the splines stick out into the rabbet. This needs to go. So use a chisel or a utility knife to clean out the ends of the spline in each corner. The final step is to paint the completed box. You have heard me say this before. Use a primer coat and 2 top coats with the best grade of latex paint you can find. At a minimum, you will want to paint the outside. However, I like to paint the inside as well. I know that most beekeepers don't paint the inside, and the literature and catalogs advise against painting the inside of a beehive. But I have never heard a convincing argument as to why this should be so. As a woodworker, I know that moisture is the #1 enemy of wood, and the inside of a hive is a high moisture environment. Wet wood quickly leads to rot and decay. So it makes sense to me to seal the inside of the hive. And I've never noticed a downside to a hive painted on the inside. If you don't want to paint the inside of the hive, there are several options. The first is to leave the wood bare and let the bees deal with it. Eventually they will coat the inside of the hive with propolis, but not before the wood absorbs a lot of moisture. A second option is to dip the hive in a preservative. There is a product on the market called Equal Wood Treatment, which is labeled as environmentally friendly, non-toxic, and made from natural elements. Although the manufacturer's website makes some rather extraordinary claims, it is certainly worth a try. A third option is to coat the inside of the hives with melted beeswax. A fourth option is to paint the inside of the hive with a tincture of propolis. I have never done this, but I know beekeepers who have, and they seem to like it. I don't collect propolis, perhaps I should, so I don't have enough to make a tincture, but it is an interesting idea. Whatever way you go, be sure to let the hive bodies dry for at least a couple of days before putting them into service. This will give your coating a time to cure and harden. Our hive bodies are done, and none too soon. The days are getting longer and the winter snow will be gone before you know it. Be sure to always provide plenty of room for your colony to grow. This will help reduce swarming, and you'll be amazed at how much nectar can be brought in during a strong honey flow. In our next video, we'll show you how to make the hives in a cover. Spring is coming, so it's time to get busy in the Beekeeper's Workshop.